Hi there and welcome. Jonathan Foust here, and welcome to this short meditation and Dharma talk. I got an oldie but a goodie to share with you. And it's about cultivating the witness, which is one of the main factors of liberation and freedom in this life. So hang on, you may be fully liberated before this thing is over. Um, Before we begin, I always like to acknowledge and some thanks to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this, to Glenn Harrison, our producer, Rita Moran, our mindful movement leader. You can join Rita at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, preparing for this talk at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. Links on my Facebook page and on my website. I have a newsletter, a weekly that tells you what's coming up, and a couple times a year I send out a whole treasure trove of my best photography. And finally, this is all offered in the spirit of generosity. I have received so much in my training and in my practice from other teachers who have made all of this available freely, which has inspired me to do the same. And part of this tradition also invites you, if you would like to support me, that would be awesome. Um, but your practice is the most important thing. And if you feel like supporting this process, thank you. It's a neurotic way to make a living, is all I can say, but it's a very fulfilling way. Okay. We're going to do a short meditation, and then we're going to explore one of these main factors of liberation. Pretty exciting. But before then, let's calm down. You might like to take a few moments, let your body sway a little bit from side to side, just work out the wiggles. And you might like to bring your attention to everything you can feel. Sounds, the air touching your skin, the movement of the breath inside, smells, perception of light behind your closed eyes. Can you just sense now everything you can feel? Might be helpful to slow this down a little bit. For the next three breaths, how much more can you feel the breath and feel the space between the in breath and the out breath? If you turn your attention to the sounds, can you identify the sounds closest to you and the sounds the furthest away? Opening your attention to touch from the outside, temperature of the air against your skin, the texture of your clothes against your skin, the points of contact between your body and whatever it is you may be sitting on or lying down on right now. Internally, the perception of any pressure or ease or flow or stagnation or tightness or heat. The sense door of taste. Is there any lingering sense of taste on your tongue? Sense of smell. Is there any subtle or not so subtle odors that you can perceive? The perception of light behind your closed eyes, if your eyes are closed. And can you sense this vast, wide range of sensations? And the brain, which is computing all of this data to make meaning for the mind. And can you sense whatever it is that it's aware of all of this? A little brief exercise, if you will. You might bring your attention to either the sound or to the sense of the breath. And for the next minute, notice how much you can feel right at the direct point of contact with those sound vibrations or the felt sense of the breath. And notice, if you can, the effect of turning this awareness on the details of sensation. And now, if you would, we'll turn our attention to the other end of the spectrum. If you notice the sounds, notice all the sound vibrations happening right now. Can you sense the silence that holds all of these sounds? And for the next minute, can you imagine an effortless quality of attention, noticing everything that happens all by itself? The stream of phenomena, sensations, thoughts, moods, states, watching and allowing. If you like, you might gently deepen your breath and let your body stretch and move. I'd like to share with you this talk from 2020, I believe. And it explores what it means to awaken the witness. And what is the witness? It's your capacity to observe the thoughts and the emotions and the sensations without being captured by them. This form of self observation is profoundly liberating. It opens up space, it opens up choice, it, it can open up ease in the midst of whatever you're experiencing. In this talk, we'll explore how to create the inner conditions that allow the witness to emerge naturally, and how to recognize something called its near enemy, something that looks like the witness, but it's not, and how to sense into a deeper layer of awareness. Witnessing is less about effort and more about remembering what's already here. Please forgive the visuals in this talk. Audio is fine, but it's rather crude and simplistic, way back from way back when. I hope you enjoy. So many blessings in your practice and in everything you feel drawn to in your life. A good number of years ago, I was stung by a honeybee out on a walk. And I didn't know it until later, but I was moving into anaphylactic shock. And as a friend was very graciously driving me to the hospital, I realized that my consciousness was shifting pretty dramatically. My sense of time was getting really, really warped. I could really feel an amazing spaciousness as I felt my life kind of falling away. And I actually had a thought thinking, wow, I'm graduating early here. And that was only in my late 20s. And an interesting thing happened. I remember we pulled into the hospital and I lost consciousness. And the next thing I remember, my awareness was on the ceiling. And I was looking down at 6 people working on this body. And I remember everything they said. You know, I want the IVs wide open, calling out blood pressure and so forth. And just watching this, and I remember thinking, that's just a slab of meat there on the table. And I remember thinking, it's the only way they're bringing that body back is through some kind of God's grace. It was at that moment, it's like I felt like I fell from the ceiling into my body. And I heard the doctor's doctor's voice in my right ear saying, he's back, we got him. That experience was really quite transformative for me because it really brought to mind, where was my awareness? What happened there? My awareness was initially not even aware that was my body. It was kind of like non-local awareness on the ceiling. It's a pretty extreme example, but it points towards something I'm excited to share with you, which is this whole idea of the witness or witness consciousness. You know, you can be aware of your thoughts while you're thinking them. You can even be aware when you're in the sleep state. If you've ever had that sense of where time and space get really disoriented, maybe you're asleep on the couch and you can hear all the sounds around you, but you feel like you're 30 feet underwater. And you can even be aware when you're dreaming. If you've ever had a dream and you're aware you're dreaming it, it really points towards something beyond just these 3 states of consciousness of waking, sleeping, and dreaming. Some traditions refer to it as witness consciousness. This capacity to be not just aware of your thoughts or your state or your dreams, but something that really points toward what it means to be fully awake. So when you can access witness consciousness, you're awake to what's happening, kind of free of reactivity, or to be aware of your reactivity. But it also points towards something kind of esoteric. You know, what does it mean to be really free inside? So I'd like to talk about, as I usually do, 4 parts. The first part is this concept of mindfulness, oftentimes referred to as present moment self-observation without judgment. I'd like to talk a little bit about how do you create the optimal space to shift your consciousness to this place of the witness, that capacity to observe. In part 3, I'd like to talk about kind of the near enemy of being the witness. These states that kind of look like the witness, but they're not really the witness. And in 4th, I'd like to point toward kind of beyond the practical element to being the observer of your experience, to something a little more esoteric, which is pointing toward awareness itself. So, I spent many, many years living in an ashram, and the inspiration for our ashram was this great teacher, Swami Kripalu. Dedicated his life to practice from an early age, 10 hours a day of meditation in silence for 19 years. It was the real deal. He lived in the ashram in the States for 4.25 years. And before he went back to India, really at the very end of his life, really to die, one of the one of his students asked him, what's the highest quality of a spiritual seeker? When I heard that question, I pretty much thought the response would be, whatever you're enjoying, stop it right now. Knuckle down, work harder. Well, what he said really surprised me. He said the highest quality of a spiritual seeker is self-observation without judgment. That kind of blew my mind. And I'd like to invite you, if you're open, to try this on just for a few moments. If you like, you can close your eyes and take 3 slow, deep breaths. And take a moment as you relax inside. What does that point to for you? The highest quality of a spiritual seeker is self-observation without judgment. And you might deepen your breath. And just take a moment to sense the imprint of that inquiry. What does it mean to be self-aware? We're turning awareness toward our inner experience. As we often say, meditation is not about stopping the mind. That's crazy. But it's about noticing your mind and noticing how you're relating to your mind and to everything else. And there's a very interesting thing. As you observe the mind and as you observe the body, as you observe the phenomena that arise in your inner world, there's a very interesting little thing here, an interesting model about the triune brain. And some argue that the triune brain is a myth, but nonetheless, I think there's really something here. It's sort of the reptilian brain. And this is all about self-preservation. This is my rock. Get away. This is my space. It's all about preserving the organism. And then there's the mammalian brain, which is more relational. It's more around tribe. It's more around feeling. And then there's this interesting thing around the prefrontal cortex. This is sort of like the evolving brain. I love what Robert Thurman said, how meditation is an evolutionary sport. And when you practice meditation, you're kind of cultivating this quality of self-awareness. This is the whole quality of where self-soothing comes in. That when there's alarm in your system, oh my God, I have this horrible conversation that I have to have next week. It's like the prefrontal cortex that goes, well, wait a minute, you've gone through this before and you've survived. It's going to be okay. There are strategies that you can use, and that sense of awareness of self, awareness of other, that quality of mindfulness, that's part of the evolving brain. If we don't have that self-awareness, then we are completely locked into a life of reactivity. Then your life is nothing more than moving away from pain or imaginary pain and moving toward pleasure, even if it's imaginary pleasure. And then we're just caught in this cycle of never-ending reactivity. That's the bad news. And the good news is that this practice of meditation is so powerful for most of us. It is contraindicated for certain states, but for most of us, it changes your physiology. When you are in a state of relaxed alertness, your physiology tends to move into a greater sense of homeostasis. Your emotional equilibrium becomes much more strong. Things knock you down, but more quickly you kind of come back to center. Your mental acuity, your awareness of the mental process is so powerful, your sense of intuition, all that stuff. But one of the great benefits is that in mindfulness, that you're less reactive to life. and you're more responsive to life. The gap between stimulus and response opens up through this practice of meditation. Stuff happens, but that little gap makes all the difference between how you respond to life. So accessing this sense of the observer, the sense of non-reactive, non-judging awareness, it sounds great. And sometimes it's really, really easy. My wonderful wife, who I adore, goes completely belly up when it comes to technology. And so I've sort of trained that when I hear a scream from her office on the other side of the house, that I can wander in there and I can see how she'll be completely frustrated around a solution. And while I'm no technological whiz, I have a little more of a background and a brain that kind of works with that. And so quite often, and this is an endless source of frustration for her, she will be caught in some problem, completely reactive, and then I can walk in. Sometimes I can diagnose it between 3 and 5 seconds and click a few buttons, and the problem goes away. So I have that sense of the witness, and she doesn't. And believe me, it gets reversed in other situations. So sometimes you have access to seeing clearly and problem solving, and sometimes you don't. And the question becomes, how do you cultivate that sense of the observer? Quite often we are chronically around doing. And so we have some identification with who we are as the person getting things done. Or we're attached to the results. And because of that, you get frustrated when anything gets in your way. One of the most powerful retreats that I've ever done, I've shared this before, and I'll just give you a quick summary, was in my never-ending quest for self-improvement back in my ashram days. A teacher came in by the name of Rishi Prabhakar. And he led our whole community into a retreat. And I was very much in those days very into yoga and very into the practice of doing and manifesting. So yoga has a tendency to sort of feed this part of your mind that's around becoming stronger, becoming more flexible, comparing how you're doing compared to others, using concentration, the dharana practices, and cultivating, manifesting states of consciousness. But in this retreat, when he began this introduction, his little opening talk on our 3-day retreat was, he said, for this retreat, I want you to do nothing. I remember I very studiously wrote that down. And he actually saw me, because I was sitting up front, because I wanted to do this right. He saw me writing it down. He said, no, I want you to do nothing. So I wrote it down and I underlined it. And then he said, put the pen down. For this retreat, I want you to do nothing. 3 days of doing nothing? And I remember very distinctly sitting there, and we were doing techniques. We were doing breathing, pranayama techniques, and so forth. But the meditation was a do-nothing meditation. I remember very clearly looking to my right and wondering if I was doing nothing better than she was doing nothing. But it's interesting how that retreat, by the way, was one of the most profound retreats I've ever taken. I had a level of relaxation I just have never really touched into before. But what I noticed as well was in that state of doing nothing, I became more aware of what was happening. And there, of course, is this cascade of phenomena that are happening all the time, this kind of explosion of all the outer data of sensations, everything that's happening around you, everything that's happening internally as you're responding and reacting to what's going on. And this is where this practice of noting or labeling can really come in handy sometimes. And some traditions really embrace this practice of noting or labeling. Sometimes I find it to be an exquisite practice of sort of disidentifying from what's happening and really being the sense of witness. And sometimes, to be honest, it's a really irritating practice. And it's just not what I need. But I want to share with you a little bit about how this works. And then we'll just kind of try it on. You might find it helpful sometimes in your practice. The idea of noting or labeling is to notice what's happening and then name it. And you can name it just in a word. And there are a couple of ways you can do this. One is more generic. One is the sense of like just noticing when there's thinking, just to say thinking. You just note that internally, thinking. And if you're aware of sensation or mood or emotion, you can just label that as feeling. So just sort of that sense of like thinking and feeling. And what happens is when you name it, as they say in some shamanic traditions, if you name a fear, you take its power away. And maybe you don't take it all away, but you do kind of create some space between it and you. And sometimes just naming it, what you're aware of begins to dispel. You see the impermanence around it. You can explore noting and labeling in a way that's a little bit more granular. For example, if you're noting like the quality of a feeling, a sense of heat, or tingling, or clench, or softening. You can also notice the quality of thought. If there are thoughts that are tinged with anger, you can notice anger or sadness. Or you can name a state of restlessness or sleepiness. So we'll do just a few minutes of this practice. And then I'm going to offer yet a third way you can explore this practice of labeling or noting and see how it works for you. So if you like, again, you can close your eyes. And you might take 3 slow, deep breaths. Notice where you feel the breath on the inside. And sense if you can take this seat of the witness, your capacity to observe. And for the next minute or so, notice if you can just label or note your experience. Again, it might be just generic, just simply thinking or feeling, or you might get more granular and name a little more of the detail of what you're aware of. And you may notice how when you practice labeling or noting, it can have a way of sort of kind of clipping the proliferation of thinking or the proliferation of feeling. It kind of brings you back a little more quickly to this sense of the observer or the witness. Another way you can practice this is to use the words are happening or is happening. For example, sounds are happening, or breath is happening, or thinking is happening, or anger is happening. And again, might continue just for another 30 seconds or so. And just try this on. And if you like, now you might deepen your breath again. And if you like, you can let your eyes open, or you remain with them closed. No one's watching. And just take a moment to sense the kind of the impact or the imprint of that practice of labeling or noting. And you may find that by naming what's happening as it's happening, it can reinforce the sense of the witness. it can sort of help you sort of disidentify or release from what's happening and create a little bit more space, there's a little bit more of a gap. Now, there are a couple things here. When you really begin to pay attention to what's happening and you really begin to name it, it's important to kind of bring to light something referred to as the aggregates. And this is a whole talk unto itself, but just a very, very brief overview is that when you really take this stance with the witness, what do you notice? And again, don't take this for gospel. As the Buddha said, don't believe a word of what I'm saying, but try it out and see if it's true for you. So the one thing you'll begin to notice when you take this seat of the witness is the whole realm of what we can call form or body. And this is just the physical stuff that's happening. Now, form, your body is kind of composed of four essential elements. There's earth, the bones. There's fire, which is the kind of the life force. There's water, all the fluids. There's air that's moving through. But this has to do with the very tangible sense of form, what you can taste, feel, touch, and smell. And now what happens is, kind of rising out of form is this whole realm of feeling. And you'll notice when you really drill down to your moment to moment to moment experience, is that feeling is going to have three essential qualities. There's the feeling that's pleasant, the feeling that's unpleasant, and then the feeling of neutral, of everything in between. And what arises out of feeling is perception. And this is kind of the mental and the sensory process that registers and labels what's going on. It's the perception of shape, of color, emotion. That's the filter of perception. And then arising out of perception are all the mental fabrications. This is the process of your mind constructing a story, making up a story about what's happening, the kind of the mental imprints that are going to initiate some kind of action. That is to say, if it's unpleasant, you'll want to nuke it. If it's pleasant, you want more. If it's neutral, you get bored and you want to shift your attention. And then arising out of mental fabrications is what we call consciousness. It's the awareness of what's happening. It's the awareness of how you're relating to it. It's kind of the discrimination between all these interconnected elements, kind of seeing the relationship between form, feeling, perception, and mental fabrications. You get to see the whole game here. There's a lot going on. And I love that Daniel Ingram talks about this whole thing of how many notings per second can you cultivate, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. In 1 second, how many distinct slices can you observe in your experience? Form, feeling, perception, the mental fabrications, the consciousness of the whole deal. There's so much going on when we really, really pay attention. And it becomes a question of well, then what's the function of all this? And on one level, the function of consciousness is self-preservation. There's a very large part of your psychobiodynamic here that's all about not dying. Don't die, and let's keep the species going. It's kind of how it helps you navigate the world skillfully when you know what you want. Consciousness helps you move toward what you want as skillfully as possible. And you can even take it beyond there and really think, well, maybe the function of consciousness is to wake up to itself, to wake up to reality. And this becomes very, very interesting, at least to me. It's about waking up from your story to find out what's real. You may have heard that phrase, it feels real, but it may not be true. Where we're completely identified with a feeling or an emotion or a concept, but that may have nothing to do with reality. And so this practice, this transformational journey through meditation is about deconstructing our false sense of who we are and getting more in alignment with reality. This enthusiastic, wholehearted cooperation with reality. About 15 years ago, I left my community that I was part of for 25 years, and I was very identified. I was a teacher, a spokesperson, a fundraiser, a representative, at one point the head of this organization. Then I moved down here to Washington, D.C. I didn't know anyone. No one knew me. And because I didn't have a job and I wasn't sure what I was going to do, I had the luxury of intensifying my practice for a while. And the natural byproduct of meditation is you become more aware, you become more sensitized. And I kind of watched this deconstruction of this old persona. The community I left, where I was a leader, I remember talking to someone down here in DC, and they asked me what I did, and I said, "Oh, well, have you ever heard of Kripalu Center in Western Massachusetts?" I said, "No." I said, "Well, that place you never heard of, I was somebody there." I got to watch the identification, the clinging to this guy who had an identification somewhere else. And over time, and it takes time, something began to arise out of that, who I was without that identity. And this is what happens when you begin to engage into practice. This is what happens when you give yourself fully to getting real. The witness, the observer, helps you deconstruct what is false and become more clear around what is true. Here's what Sri Nisargadatta, this beautiful non-dual teacher, says. In the mirror of your mind, all kinds of pictures appear and disappear. Knowing that they are entirely your own creations, watch them silently come and go. Be alert, but not perturbed. The attitude of silent observation is the very foundation of practice. You see the picture, but you are not the picture. So we're doing this all the time. We see the picture. The question is, do we believe the picture? Or can we recognize that we're not the picture, but we're the one who's aware of the picture? You begin to see not only what's happening, but the lens through which you're perceiving your experience. And there are three basic lenses, three basic filters that are like contact lenses, and you don't even know you're wearing them. And those three filters are greed, hatred, and delusion. Either you're looking through the lens of wanting and desire, or you're perceiving through the lens of aversion, of pushing away, or you're viewing through the lens of confusion. You're not seeing clearly, or you are seeing clearly. So cultivating the witness can be so, so powerful. And as I'm aware of self-observation, I'm also aware that I don't have a lot of time left, and there's a lot more I'd like to say about this. So if you take this sense of the witness, it's a very interesting thing. I remember someone told me they were on retreat, and they could really feel this sense of just noting, that sense of labeling, like, oh, a thought is happening, feeling is happening, thought is happening, feeling is happening, sadness is happening, wanting is happening, hunger is happening, etc., etc. And their experience started to become very mechanical. A very kind of sense of like it's all just cause and effect. It's just karma, and I'm just watching the wheel of karma, and it's very, very cold. And this person said they could really see, like, okay, so this is reality. Everyone dies. Whatever we focus on, we tend to get identified, and we become that. And there was a level of indifference that started to arise out of this sort of like cold view of life. Witness can lead to a sense of equanimity. And equanimity is a sense of steadiness. In the midst of everything that's changing, here's this kind of unbroken sense of, I'm aware of this, I'm aware of that, I'm aware of that. But the shadow side, or the near enemy of that, is like a lens of not caring, a lens of indifference, a quality of disconnection, or kind of a loss of feeling. And perhaps you can sense that sense of, it's all happening, there's nothing I can do about it, just let the wheel turn, who cares? So what's interesting here is if you become aware of indifference, and at some point you'll become aware of like, oh, I'm kind of viewing through a lens of disassociation. I'm actually disassociating from my experience. And again, this is a natural part of the process. When you become more aware, there are two fundamental fears that arise, from what I can tell. When you take the seat of the observer, one is a fear of, I'm not going to feel anything. I'm just going to be this cold, indifferent observer, or I'm going to feel too much. I'm going to get overwhelmed by the challenges, by the shadow of life, by my fears. Inevitably, if you stay with the practice, you'll notice there's another wing that begins to arise. The witness can really heighten the sense of wisdom. Okay, this is what's happening. I see it as it's happening, and I can actually perceive the filter through which I'm perceiving. But another wing begins to arise, and this is the wing of compassion. This is the wing of the heart that can hold it all. And it's so, I can't think of a better way to articulate it than Sri Nisargadatta. When you really look, even through the impartial eyes of the witness, this other wing begins to come alive. And here's what Sri Nisargadatta said. It's hard to say Sri Nisargadatta without sounding intoxicated. But here's what Sri Nisargadatta said. When I look inside and see that I'm nothing, that's wisdom. When I look outside and see that I'm everything, that's love. And between these two, my life flows. We see the inherent emptiness of phenomena rolling on. That's wisdom. And when we realize that everything that's happening is really who we are as well, that can spark love, compassion, kindness, empathy. So you may be familiar with the acronym of RAIN. Recognize, allow, investigate, and then nourish what you find. So when something arises that feels really, really difficult, strong sensation, strong emotion, strong mental state, you name it, you recognize it. Oh, here's that existential dread. That's recognizing, that's wisdom. Then you ask yourself, can I be with it? And here, this is something that I say this over and over again, but it's so, so important. Can I be with it? And listen, because sometimes you can't, because you're going to lose the witness. You're going to get re-traumatized. You're going to get flooded. You won't be able to be the observer. You won't be able to move into the investigation part of the practice. So sometimes you can be the witness and sometimes you can't. And in practice, particularly when you're diving deep and you're deconstructing who you were, you can't do it. So it's very skillful. Change your attention, shift your focus. Another time when the conditions are different, you may be able to take that perspective of the witness. But the more you pay attention to the witness, the more you will also notice that you are reacting all the time. All the time. Remember once I was at an airport, and I walked by one of the bars in the airport, and they were playing a football game. There's a football game. I just sort of paused and I looked at it. I don't even know who was playing, and I noticed, why am I rooting for that team? I don't even know who they are. We do it all the time. Awareness doesn't really care, but it's our conditioning that cares. Greed, hatred, delusion, or confusion. And so there's something very powerful. When you look through the witness, these two wings come alive, you begin to see more objectively. You can begin to sense someone's point of view when you take that perspective of the witness. Oh, here's what I feel. Look, I wonder what the other person feels. The witness opens up all kinds of possibilities. And there can be this sense of, at least in my own practice, of like, oh my gosh, it's about developing the witness. That's what it's all about. If I can be the witness, I can be with anything. And yet, it opens up another question. Is there anything beyond the witness? It's kind of an age-old question of like, well, what is and where is awareness? And there's this concept of the homunculus, and this concept, through the ages of this perfectly formed you inside, like a self within the self, who's kind of observing and who's aware. And I'm really sorry I'm short on time. I only have about 5 minutes left, but I really want to point toward this because I find this so powerful. You will identify with your body, especially when you're at the dentist. You will identify with your emotions, especially when you're angry. And you'll identify with your mind pretty much all the time. But what is it that's aware? So here's an interesting thing, and I may have to do a second talk on this because this kind of gets me excited. If you like, you can close your eyes, and this may be close to our final meditation here. You might slow down and deepen your breath. Maybe draw your shoulders up toward your ears and just take a long deep breath, hold the breath, and then just drop your shoulders. And let yourself just take in these words from Sri Nisargadatta. This is 2 sentences. As you watch your mind, you discover yourself as the watcher. When you stand motionless, only watching, you discover yourself as the light behind the watcher. And can you sense, if just for a moment, who you are as the light behind the watcher, the light behind the witness? As you're ready, you can deepen your breath. And if you'd like, you can open your eyes. When I woke up on the ceiling in the emergency room, looking at 6 people working on this body, I was not aware of myself as a body. I wasn't aware of myself as even my mind. I had that glimpse into this kind of expanded sense of awareness, what we could think of as like non-local awareness. And then I kind of dropped into, oh my God, this sense of non-local awareness is suddenly localized. I'm back in a body. I'm back in this persona. Taking the witness can be a very, very powerful way to cultivate more happiness. When you're the observer, you become much more aware of not only what's happening as it's happening, but the filter through which you're perceiving it. It opens your capacity for empathy, because when you're not identified, you can imagine what the other person feels, what the other person needs. And that has a profound way of opening your heart and cultivating a greater sense of wisdom and compassion. But when you can sense the light behind the witness, the light behind this, then you're turning your attention to the mystery. And you can't force it. All you can do is relax and observe, and relax and observe even more. So let's close with a short little reflection. If you like, you can close your eyes. And again, as you take 3 slow, deep breaths, let all of your attention experience the breath and feel this quality of gathering. You're gathering awareness in the here and now. And as you are awake to your breath, can you imagine the seat of the witness? Can you just sense the lens through which you're perceiving your experience? If there's any sense of wanting, any sense of aversion, any sense of confusion, can you, if just for a few moments, open your awareness 360 degrees to everything that is changing and sense what it's like to rest in presence. You're deeply relaxed, and at the same time, you're alert. And can you imagine, if just for a few moments now, of what it's like to deeply relax? And can you imagine, and can you sense the light behind the witness, the awareness behind the witness? Reflecting on these words from Sri Nisargadatta, and just sensing who you are as a being of feeling and as a being of awareness. Consciousness does not shine by itself. It shines by a light beyond from which it appears, which gives it being. Don't be all the time immersed in your experience. Remember that you are beyond the experiencer, ever unborn and deathless. Remembering it, the quality of pure knowledge will emerge, the light of unconditional awareness. You might now deepen your breath. If you'd like, you can open your eyes. Being the witness, being the observer, has got tremendous practical benefit. You will be less reactive. You will be more responsive. You will be guided by wisdom and by greater empathy and compassion. And it also points toward this sense of sensing who you are unconditioned. Your access to who you are beyond your experience, beyond the witness. And I find it helpful to remember that we can't make those moments of sensing the light behind the witness. You can't make that happen. but you can cultivate the most optimal experience you can, which for me is this sense of deep relaxation, that quality of alertness, and that deep, deep sense of curiosity, the willingness to open to the mystery. I hope you found this helpful. I so enjoy sharing these practices and how they can be truly transforming in our lives. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and may you and your witness have a wonderful, wonderful time from here on. Take care. I look forward to seeing you again.